My name is Dr. Michael R. Cole, and I'm a second-year pathology resident at St. Augustine Medical Center in San Diego, California. I never believed in anything beyond what could be measured, stained, and seen through a microscope. That was before the night of April 12, 2022, when I stood alone in the autopsy suite with a cadaver that shouldn't have been able to speak, and yet somehow it did. I was covering the overnight shift. The hospital morgue is always quieter after midnight, when the noise of the upper floors fades into a hum that feels like it belongs to another world. The air is cold, filtered through the metal vents above the dissection tables. Fluorescent lights buzz softly. Everything smells like disinfectant, steel, and faint formalin. Around me, 6 white-draped bodies lay on gurneys waiting for autopsy. I was assigned to one, case number 220412A, a 46-year-old male named Thomas Greer, found dead in his garage in what the police initially labeled a possible suicide. The body had been discovered slumped near his car, engine off, with bruising along the neck and a deep contusion near the right temple. The coroner wanted a full workup to rule out foul play. I signed my name on the case logbook at 12:47 a.m., slipped on my gloves, and pulled back the sheet. Thomas Greer's skin was pale gray, with fixed lividity on his back and lower limbs. The body had been refrigerated since the previous afternoon, no decomposition, rigor mortis partial. There was an abrasion pattern on the neck that immediately caught my attention. Linear, shallow, inconsistent with a rope. It looked more like a thin strap or belt had been used. The police note said no such object was found near the scene. Something didn't add up. I remember glancing at the wall clock, 1:03 a.m., before switching on the dictation recorder. Autopsy of decedent Thomas Greer, male, 46 years of age, performed April 12, 2022, by Dr. Michael R. Cole, resident physician, under supervision of attending pathologist Dr. Arjun Khatri. The voice recorder clicked softly. My scalpel glided down the chest in the standard Y-shaped incision. The familiar sound of skin separating from subcutaneous tissue echoed in the quiet room. I exposed the rib cage, opened the thoracic cavity, checked the lungs, edematous but clear of aspirate. The heart was unremarkable in structure, weighing 312 grams, normal for his age. Then I moved to the neck. As I dissected deeper into the soft tissue of the neck, I noticed diffuse hemorrhage under the sternocleidomastoid, suggesting compression while the man was still alive. Manual strangulation or ligature. I couldn't tell yet. I turned off the dictation briefly to note measurements in my logbook. The room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation. Then something, so faint I almost missed it, whispered my name. Michael. I froze. The sound was barely audible, like a breath caught in a pipe. My first thought was static from the recorder. I leaned closer to it, hit playback, but nothing unusual was there. I told myself it was fatigue. I hadn't slept since the previous morning, and autopsy rooms at night can play tricks on your senses. I continued dissecting the soft tissue of the neck, tracing a linear hemorrhage toward the trachea, when the whisper came again. Clearer this time, though still weak, like air escaping from deep within the lungs. Michael, not suicide. Every muscle in my body tightened. The words were distinct. I looked around. No one was there. The intercom was silent. I stared at the cadaver, at Thomas Greer's face. His eyes were closed, his lips slightly parted. I could see no movement, no airflow, but I swear the faintest ripple had passed across his throat, a pulse that shouldn't exist. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard that my gown moved with it. I shut off all the lights except the one over the table and tried to reason with myself. Gases escaping through the trachea. Maybe I'd pressed the chest cavity just enough to release a whisper of air through the vocal cords. That had to be it. But then, against every law of physiology, The cadaver's lips moved. They parted slightly, and a shallow wheeze came through. I leaned closer without meaning to. What I heard next made me step back until I hit the metal tray behind me. He killed me. I stood frozen, scalpel still in hand, staring at the body of Thomas Greer. I told myself it was impossible. Post-mortem phonation isn't real. Lungs can't push air without muscle contraction. But when I looked at the trachea I had already exposed, I saw that the vocal cords were slightly open, moist, and the air from the abdominal cavity was still releasing in faint bursts due to decomposition gases shifting from internal pressure. It was a fluke of anatomy, I told myself, an illusion. But those 3 words had sounded too deliberate, too human, too personal. My hands shook as I resumed the autopsy. I focused on anatomy, measurements, procedures, anything but that voice. The hyoid bone had a transverse fracture on the right side. That confirmed strangulation. I dictated, "Neck dissection reveals right hyoid fracture consistent with homicidal ligature compression." I paused, exhaled, continued to the cranial cavity. The scalp incision felt routine, but I couldn't stop replaying that whisper in my head. At 2:27 a.m., I opened the skull and reflected the calvarium. There was a small subdural hematoma on the right temporal region. Not enough to kill him. The actual cause of death? Most likely asphyxia due to strangulation. But something else felt wrong. Under the fingernails, dark fibers, blue-gray like denim threads. I swabbed and bagged them for the police. Then I saw something tucked inside his right hand, a fragment of paper, soaked and stiff. I unfolded it with forceps. Written in smudged ink was a single word: Sam. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe Thomas Greer had tried to write something before he died. I placed the note in evidence bag number C041207 and logged it. But the whisper didn't leave my head. When I finished suturing the body at around 3:45 a.m., I turned off the overhead light and stepped toward the stainless steel sink. Then I heard it again. Softer, but unmistakable. Sam killed me. The voice was hollow, drawn from air that shouldn't exist. The cadaver's eyes were half open now, pupils clouded white. I felt a chill so deep it reached my bones. I walked backward until my back hit the autopsy table behind me. I didn't report what I heard. What could I say? That a dead man had identified his killer? No one would believe me. I cleaned up, sealed the body bag, signed the post-mortem report, and placed the cadaver back into Refrigeration Unit 3B. The room returned to its mechanical silence. But before leaving, I turned one last time toward the cold metal door. For the briefest second, I thought I saw condensation form on the inside of the glass window. 3 faint letters. S-A-M. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the resident on-call room, scrolling through the police intake report. The deceased's next of kin was listed as a Samuel Greer, his younger brother. Address, same as the decedent's home. I closed the file, staring at the name until the screen dimmed. Whatever happened that night in the garage wasn't suicide, and whatever I heard in that autopsy suite, whether it was physics or something beyond it, had just told me who to look at. If you're still watching, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life forensic and pathology stories that reveal the hidden corners of medicine. Comment below, what would you have done if a cadaver whispered your name during autopsy?
I spent the entire morning trying to convince myself that what happened during the autopsy was just a series of coincidences, shifting gases, an overworked mind, and the eerie acoustics of a steel room at 3 a.m. But by the time daylight poured into the pathology lab, I still couldn't get the sound of that whisper out of my head. It wasn't just noise. It had cadence, intent, and emotion. And the word Sam written inside that clenched hand wasn't imagination. It was there, on record, bagged in evidence, sitting in a locker waiting for police pickup. Still, I tried to be rational. At 8:05 a.m., Dr. Arjun Khattri, my attending, arrived for morning review. He was a tall man in his early 50s, calm, precise, and the kind of mentor who didn't tolerate superstition. I briefed him on my findings: the hemorrhage pattern, hyoid fracture, subdural hematoma, and the evidence note. I skipped the part about the whisper. He nodded slowly while examining the slides under the microscope. "You did good work, Cole. This isn't suicide. It's homicide. I'll call Detective Sloan to come down for the report." I exhaled quietly, half relieved to hear someone else say it. The evidence would speak for itself. The voice didn't matter. Or so I thought. At 10:12 a.m., Detective Sloan arrived. Mid-40s, blunt voice, coffee-stained trench coat. I recognized him from previous cases. "Morning, Doc," he said, flipping open his notepad. "Heard you've got something interesting on Greer?" I handed him the autopsy summary and the evidence bag with the note. His brow furrowed. "Sam, you think that's his brother?" "Could be," I said, trying to sound detached. "He was the one who found the body, according to your report." Sloan scratched his chin. "Yeah. Said he came home and saw his brother in the garage. Claimed he tried to pull him out, but couldn't. Seemed shaken up, but something about him was off. I'll re-interview him." I nodded, pretending to be focused on a tissue slide while my mind was spinning. If the whisper was real, if somehow that sound came from what was left of Thomas Greer, then his brother is the one he was naming. By noon, I was supposed to be done with my shift, but I stayed longer. Curiosity turned into compulsion. I kept reviewing the video footage from the autopsy camera, the ceiling-mounted CCTV that records every case for quality assurance. I scrolled to the timestamp between 2:24 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., the exact minute I thought I heard the whisper. The audio was faint, mostly static, but right at 2:27:19, a soft noise came through. It wasn't just background hiss. It was shaped, a low, breathy tone followed by a distinct, "killed me." My blood ran cold. It was on tape. I turned the speaker volume up to full, but the words remained buried in the static like a voice trying to break through from another frequency. I could hear my own voice dictating moments later, describing the hyoid fracture, but that faint, impossible whisper was captured right before it. I downloaded the clip onto a hospital flash drive and sealed it in my locker. I told myself it was for verification, but deep down, I just didn't want anyone else to erase it. Around 3 p.m., Sloan returned. He looked frustrated. We talked to the brother. He is cooperative, but he has got no alibi for the night of the death. Says he was at home, asleep, but no one can confirm it. He paused, tapping his pen. "You said you found bruises consistent with strangulation." "Yes," I said, showing him the autopsy photos. "And note the linear abrasion here. It's narrow, could match a belt or strap." Sloan grunted. "Brother runs a small mechanic shop, right? Could be a work belt or something similar." He pocketed the photos. "Appreciate it, Doc. You've helped a lot." When he left, I thought that would be the end of it. The logical part of my brain wanted closure. Case filed, police investigate, and life goes on. But that night, when I returned to the on-call quarters, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas Greer's pale lips moving. I heard that same broken whisper repeating the name. I started to wonder whether I'd breathed in something, formalin vapors, maybe carbon monoxide from the refrigeration units. But the tests we run in the morgue are safe. I knew it wasn't chemical. It was something else entirely. 2 days later, the hospital received a call from the San Diego Police Department. They wanted a supplementary report on the fiber evidence. I pulled out the slides and re-examined the threads under the microscope. Denim fibers, consistent with blue jeans, but with a distinct grease-stained pattern along the edges. I sent my report electronically at 11:47 a.m. A few hours later, I got a message from Sloan. Brother arrested. Found matching fibers on belt. Confessed partial. Says it was an accident. My heart sank. Accident. That word always stung in homicide cases. Sloan later told me Samuel Greer admitted to getting into an argument with Thomas over money. Said he pushed him too hard, that the belt slipped during a scuffle. He claimed panic, fear. Tried to stage it as a suicide. The case would likely close with manslaughter charges. But for me, the nightmare didn't end, because later that evening, when the body of Thomas Greer was released to the funeral home, something else happened that no one could explain. At 7:38 p.m., one of the morgue attendants, a quiet guy named Javier, came running up to me pale as a ghost. "Doc," he said, "the refrigeration door, it's fogging up again." I followed him down the corridor to Unit 3B. The metal door was covered with a fine layer of condensation even though the temperature gauge read a stable 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And just like before, faint letters formed on the inside of the glass. S. A. M. Javier swore he hadn't touched it. The security camera above the door showed no one near it for over 3 hours. I didn't say a word. I just watched as the letters slowly faded. That night, I sat in the break room staring at my coffee until it got cold. I thought about deleting the autopsy video, about erasing the whisper from my mind, but part of me couldn't. Because if that voice was somehow real, if it had crossed the impossible barrier between life and death to identify its killer, then maybe there was something sacred about it, something that deserved to be preserved. I transferred the video clip to a secure drive labeled Case 22-412-A, audio fragment, encrypted it, and locked it in the hospital evidence archive. I made one copy for myself, which I never told anyone about. I stored it on a small flash drive and kept it inside a sealed test tube in my pathology locker. Weeks passed. Life in the hospital resumed its rhythm. Morning case conferences, tissue slides, biopsies, long nights in the grossing room. But the morgue still felt different. The air was heavier somehow, like the walls remembered. Some nights when I stayed late, I thought I could hear the faint echo of breathing from the refrigeration units, though I told myself it was just the compressor cycling. Once at 2 a.m., I swear I heard my own name again, barely audible beneath the hum of the air vents. I turned off all the lights, stood in the dark, and listened. Nothing. Just silence. The Thomas Greer case eventually closed with a plea deal. Samuel Greer received 8 years in state prison. Detective Sloan thanked me for my help. Dr. Cattree congratulated me on my first big homicide confirmation. Everyone moved on. But I didn't. Not really, because even though the case was solved on paper, I couldn't escape the feeling that the body had tried to make sure justice was done, and that somehow I had been chosen to hear it. The weeks after the Thomas Greer case ended were quiet on the surface, but nothing about me felt quiet inside. Every time I walked past the autopsy suite, my chest tightened. I'd tell myself, it's over, the case is closed. But the moment I stepped near those stainless steel doors, a low hum in my ears would start again, almost like the faint vibration before a voice forms. I tried to bury myself in work. Pathology residency is demanding enough to erase almost any thought, and for a while that helped. Surgical biopsies, grossing sessions, cytology conferences, they all gave me structure. Routine was my armor against what I couldn't explain. But that illusion broke on May 6, 2022 at 11:23 p.m. I was on call again. The hospital was running with reduced staff because 2 residents were out sick, so I volunteered to take a late autopsy for a John Doe found near the harbor. I thought it would keep me busy and maybe quiet my mind. The morgue lights flickered as I entered. The temperature was perfect, 38 degrees. The compressors hummed rhythmically. I logged the new case. Unidentified male, approximate age 50, cause of death undetermined. As I wheeled the body onto the autopsy cable, I saw something that froze me mid-step. The tag on the left toe read 3B. That was the same unit Thomas Greer had been stored in. My throat tightened, but I ignored it. Coincidence, I told myself, just a random assignment. Still, when I opened the chamber to retrieve the cadaver, I noticed a faint circle of condensation on the inner glass, the exact size of a palm. No letters this time, just the print. I placed the body on the table and switched on the dictation mic. Autopsy of unidentified male, case number 220506B, performed by Dr. Michael Cole, St. Augustine Medical Center. The routine felt grounding. The first incision, the systematic dissection, it was mechanical, predictable. But halfway through, when I began examining the trachea, that same whisper of air came again, brushing against the side of my face like a draft from a vent. I froze. The overhead lights flickered once. Then silence. I looked toward the refrigeration doors. They were all closed, the temperature gauges steady. The only sound was my own breathing inside the surgical mask. I tried to ignore it and focused on the neck dissection, but as soon as I lifted the larynx, I saw something lodged near the glottis, a tiny scrap of paper soaked and folded tight. I removed it with forceps, unrolled it gently under the light. The paper was from a torn medical form, our own hospital's, and scribbled in shaky handwriting were 3 words that made every nerve in my body go still. For a long time, I just stared. My gloves trembled. I checked the identification records again, but the new body had no name, no connection to Thomas Greer. I reviewed the intake log. The corpse had been found in a drainage canal near Mission Bay. No ID, no phone, no family contact yet. And yet, here was this note, written on a St. Augustine hospital form, saying something only I should know. I sat down on the stool, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. My rational mind screamed for explanation. Maybe someone was playing a sick joke, maybe a staff prank. But who could have known that phrase, that exact phrase, heard me, the same words that voice whispered the night of the Greer autopsy? I badged the note as evidence, but this time I didn't report it immediately. I locked it in my personal cabinet, away from the main log. I just couldn't bring myself to explain it to Dr. Kotry or Sloan again. Instead, I finished the autopsy mechanically. Cause of death? Drowning. No signs of trauma, no struggle injuries, no drugs and toxicology, just a drowned man with a note in his throat written to me. The next morning during case sign-out, I was pale enough that even Dr. Kotry noticed. "Cole, you okay?" he asked, sipping his coffee. I nodded, muttered something about lack of sleep. He didn't push further, but later that afternoon when I went to my locker to retrieve the note, the cabinet door was already open. The envelope I had sealed was torn. The note was gone. I searched the entire lab, questioned the attendants, checked the janitorial logs. Nothing. It was as if it had vanished from existence. That night around 10 p.m. I got a call from Detective Sloan. "Cole, you might want to hear this," he said. "Remember the Greer case? The brother, Sam, hung himself in his holding cell this morning." My stomach dropped. "He left a note," Sloan continued, voice heavy. All it said was, "He knows." I sat there holding the phone, staring at the floor. "He knows," I whispered it under my breath. The exact feeling from the autopsy came flooding back, the chill, the whisper, the condensation letters. Thomas Greer's voice hadn't just identified his killer. It had followed him. And somehow, now it had followed me. Over the next few nights, I barely slept. My shifts blurred together. Whenever I closed my eyes, I'd see that autopsy suite, hear the faint hiss of air escaping lungs that shouldn't move, and then the echo of that same voice, fainter each time, calling my name. Michael! Sometimes it came from behind the walls, sometimes from the ventilation ducts. I even went as far as running a full HVAC inspection report, pretending it was for temperature fluctuation issues. The maintenance team found nothing wrong. One night, I decided to test myself to prove this was all in my head. I brought a small recorder to the morgue and left it running overnight inside Unit 3B. I locked the door and went home. The next morning, when I came back, the recorder was still there, red light blinking. I replayed the audio in the residence lounge, expecting just the hum of the refrigeration fans. For 3 hours, it was exactly that, steady hum, occasional clank, nothing unusual. But at 3:12 a.m., right in the middle of the recording, the fan sound dipped. A faint gap of silence followed. Then, in the lowest, rasping whisper I've ever heard, a voice said, "He's here." I stopped the playback immediately. My palms were slick with sweat. There was no one inside that morgue except those refrigeration units. I checked the timestamp, 3:12 a.m., the same hour I had finished the Greer autopsy weeks before. I felt something deep in my gut shift, the realization that whatever this was, it wasn't done with me. By the next week, I started avoiding the morgue altogether, volunteering for microscopic work only. My colleagues noticed but didn't question much. Residents burn out easily, and everyone assumed I was just exhausted. But I couldn't escape it. One evening while reviewing biopsy slides in the lab, I noticed condensation forming on the glass of the slide warmer. 3 faint letters appeared, just like before. S-A-M. I dropped the slide. It shattered. I grabbed my coat and left the hospital before anyone noticed. That night, I drove to Mission Bay, the same place where the unidentified drowning victim had been found. I parked near the edge of the water, staring at the dark surface. For a long time, I just listened to the waves. And then, faintly under the wind, I heard it again, the same whisper, the same voice that had haunted me since April. It said only one thing: "Thank you." The sound was calm, almost peaceful, as if the weight that had followed me for weeks finally loosened. The air grew still. The water was silent. I sat there until sunrise, not sure whether I had just imagined it all or if I truly had heard a man's final words crossing whatever barrier lies between death and the living. When I returned to St. Augustine Medical Center that morning, the morgue felt different, brighter somehow. The air didn't hum anymore. The refrigeration units were silent except for their regular cycles. And when I checked Unit 3B, the glass was clean. No fog, no letters, no trace of anything. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the room was just a room again.
The morning after I returned to the hospital, I told myself the nightmare was over. The morgue looked ordinary again. The steel counters gleamed, the vents hummed with their usual mechanical rhythm, and for the first time in weeks, there was no condensation on the glass doors. But when I tried to focus on work, my hands still shook. The head of pathology, Dr. Arjun Khatri, called me into his office. "Cole, I've noticed you've been avoiding autopsies lately," he said, his voice calm but sharp. I hesitated, then told him part of the truth, that I thought I'd been hearing things, that stress and overwork might be getting to me. He listened carefully and said, "You're not the first resident to burn out, Michael. This work takes a toll. Take 2 days off. Clear your head." I wanted to take that offer, but something inside me refused. There was still that note I had found inside the drowning victim's throat, the one that later disappeared from my locker. That wasn't burnout or hallucination. Someone had taken it. And the fact that the handwriting matched hospital forms meant one thing: whoever wrote it had access to pathology storage. That night, instead of going home, I stayed behind. Around 11:40 p.m., I unlocked the autopsy suite with my ID badge,
turned off the overhead lights, and let the dim emergency bulbs cast long shadows across the stainless steel. I checked the logbook. Every refrigeration unit had been inspected earlier in the day, except 3B. I opened the temperature chart. It showed a brief spike to 42 degrees Fahrenheit at 3:10 a.m. 2 nights ago, right when my recorder had picked up the whisper. That wasn't paranormal. That was mechanical failure or interference. I went to the back of the refrigeration system, where the ventilation ducts and drainage pipes met. The sound of the air unit resonated like a hollow tunnel. I crouched and listened. The hum vibrated at irregular intervals, shifting pitch as the compressor cycled. I realized then how easily a pressure release through that narrow tubing could produce a phonetic sound, not a true voice, but something that could mimic words when caught in rhythm with background noise. In my exhausted state that night, it had fooled me. But the missing note still didn't make sense. I followed the ducts toward the maintenance corridor, a narrow passage between the morgue and pathology records. Few people went there. Inside, beneath the grated floor vent, I saw a crumpled paper envelope. I used my forceps to pull it out. The handwriting on the front read, "Evidence, Internal Audit." Inside were photocopies of my autopsy report and photos from the Greer case, the same ones I'd sent to Detective Sloan weeks ago. Someone had reprinted and hid them here. I reported it the next morning to Dr. Khatri, who brought in hospital security. They checked access logs and discovered that a maintenance technician, Leo Hammond, had entered the morgue unauthorized multiple times during night shifts. He was contracted to service the refrigeration units, but had no clearance to access pathology files. When confronted, Hammond initially denied everything until Sloan came to interview him. Under questioning, Hammond admitted that he had been feeding case data to a freelance journalist who was writing about forensic anomalies in California hospitals. That's when the last pieces started fitting together. Sloan told me later that Hammond had also planted a small wireless microphone near the ceiling duct in Unit 3B to capture autopsy conversations for the reporter. The microphone was still partially functioning when I recorded that whisper. The static, the distortion, the low frequency, all of it had merged with the mechanical noise from the vent, creating the illusion of a human voice. But there was more. The journalist Hammond worked for had visited the morgue weeks before, posing as a funeral assistant. She'd seen my name on the Greer report and later mailed Hammond the phrase, "Michael heard me," to slip into one of the upcoming autopsy cases, hoping to spook me and document my reaction for her article about psychological strain in forensic medicine. It was a cruel setup, meant to sensationalize how pathology workers break under pressure. When I heard that, part of me wanted to laugh, part of me wanted to throw up. I wasn't haunted by the dead. I was manipulated by the living. Hammond was arrested for evidence tampering, and the reporter's credentials were revoked after the hospital's legal team intervened. The story never saw publication. Still, the damage was done. My trust in the silence of that autopsy room was gone. Forever. I took my 2 days off, but rest didn't come easily. When I finally returned, Dr. Khatri asked if I wanted to switch to histopathology for a while, less exposure to postmortem cases. I agreed. For months afterwards, I lived among slides, microscopes, and stains, instead of scalpels and cold rooms. But sometimes, late in the evening, when I'm alone reviewing tissue samples, and the air vent hums in that same low tone, I still think about how easily science and perception can blur, how the human brain, under fatigue and isolation, can hear patterns in noise and see meaning where there's none, and how people, not ghosts, can twist those perceptions into tools for their own agenda. That's the truth I learned as a pathology resident. The dead never whisper. It's the living who speak through them. Sometimes through evidence, sometimes through lies. And it's our job to tell the difference.
The legal hearing was held in a small administrative boardroom at St. Matthew's Medical Center.
A long mahogany table divided the room. On one side sat the hospital review committee, 3 physicians, a legal consultant, and a representative from the Medical Ethics Board. On the other, Detective Sloan, Dr. Catry, and I. It didn't feel like a courtroom. It felt worse, quieter, heavier, as if the air itself was judging. The case wasn't about murder anymore. It was about what the media had turned it into, a pathology resident who thought corpses talked. The chairperson, Dr. Lena Morales, started, "Dr. Cole, we need a full account of what you experienced during the Greer case and the subsequent events." I'd rehearsed it in my head 100 times, but the moment I began, the tremor returned to my voice. I told them everything: the whisper, the missing note, the refrigeration unit, and how the investigation traced it back to Leo Hammond and the reporter. Every sentence felt like scraping an old wound. When I finished, Sloan placed a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside was the tiny wireless microphone they'd recovered from the vent. "This was transmitting to a receiver hidden inside Hammond's janitorial cart," Sloan said. "We matched the broadcast interference pattern with the original audio Dr. Cole recorded. The overlap is exact." Dr. Morales leaned forward. "You're telling us that what Dr. Cole perceived as a voice was actually electronic feedback from this device?" "Exactly," Sloan replied. "The distortion aligned with the air pressure cycles. The words weren't real. They were artifacts shaped by static and compressor rhythm." There was a long silence after that. Dr. Morales looked at me. "Dr. Cole, you've been through psychological evaluation?" "Yes," I said. "Twice. Both cleared me of psychosis or hallucination. They confirmed severe sleep deprivation and auditory pareidolia, hearing meaningful patterns in noise." Dr. Morales nodded slowly, jotting notes. "You understand why this had to be reviewed. A pathology resident claiming to hear cadavers could have damaged this hospital's credibility." "I understand. That's why I came forward. I wanted to know if I was losing my mind or if something real was happening." For a while, the boardroom stayed quiet, broken only by the click of pens. Then Dr. Catry spoke up. "If I may, I've supervised Dr. Cole for over a year. He's meticulous. What happened here isn't delusion. It's the result of unethical interference in a high-stress environment. He didn't just imagine it, he investigated it and helped uncover a serious breach in hospital security." The ethics representative, a gray-haired physician named Dr. O'Donnell, sighed. "And that's exactly why this incident will be published. Not as scandal, but as study material. This is a lesson in how perception, fatigue, and external manipulation can collide in medicine." That day, the board cleared me of any wrongdoing. Hammond was formally charged with evidence tampering and invasion of privacy. The journalist, identified as Ruth Ellman, lost her media license and faced a civil lawsuit from the hospital for defamation and unauthorized data acquisition. But none of it felt like victory. My reputation among my colleagues had changed. I could sense it in their careful glances, the quiet pauses in the hallway conversations. The story had spread, the resident who heard whispers in the morgue. Even though the truth came out, myths cling harder than facts. 2 months later, I was rotated back to autopsy duty. Dr. Catry said, "You can't let one incident define your career." That morning, I walked back into the suite. Everything looked the same: the silver tables, the rows of drawers, the faint antiseptic sting in the air. But now there were new security cameras installed above each refrigeration unit. A small sign read, "Recording for quality and security purposes." I started the autopsy of a man who had died from a construction accident. As I made the Y incision and dictated findings into the recorder, the steady rhythm of the ventilation hummed above me. It almost sounded like breathing again, deep, mechanical, alive. I paused and smiled faintly. The mind always listens for ghosts when it's afraid of silence. After the report, I sat alone in the observation room. Through the glass window, I could see my reflection beside the cadaver. We were both still, one living, one gone. I thought of how fragile the line was between fear and logic, between belief and evidence. That night changed me not because of what I heard, but because of what it revealed. Truth doesn't whisper, it waits. A week later, Dr. Morales called me to her office. "We're including your case in a medical ethics symposium," she said. "It's titled The Whispering Morgue, Cognitive Bias and Forensic Perception. We'd like you to co-present." I hesitated, then agreed. During the conference, I stood before an audience of doctors and residents. The lights were hot, my palms slick with sweat. I played the original recording, the static-filled murmur that had once convinced me a cadaver spoke. Then I played the isolated ventilation sample. It sounded eerily similar. Gasps filled the room. "This," I told them, "is what exhaustion can do. It teaches you that medicine isn't just about cutting bodies open. It's about understanding your own limits. The dead don't whisper, but the human brain will fill silence with its own noise." Afterward, a young resident came to me and said quietly, "Thank you. I've been hearing things too. Not voices, just echoes and the ICU monitors. I thought I was going crazy." I told her what Dr. Cattree once told me. "You're not crazy. You're tired. Rest is part of medicine too." Months later, I left St. Matthew's to begin a fellowship in forensic pathology at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Before I left, I visited the morgue one last time. The new technician on duty, a calm man named Ortiz, was cleaning the counters. He noticed me standing at the door. "You're Dr. Cole, right? The one from that case?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's me." He nodded toward the refrigeration units. "Heard they redid the ducts after what happened. No more weird sounds now." I looked at the cold steel and thought about how fragile truth could be, how easily science can be turned into superstition and fear into story. As I walked out, I glanced back once. The lights flickered slightly just as the air compressor turned on. A low hum rolled through the room. Not a whisper, just the sound of air, metal, and memory. I smiled and whispered back, "Rest easy." And then I left. Subscribe to Strange Forensic Cases for more true-to-life medical stories, where every mystery is grounded in science and every whisper has an answer. Do you think stress can make doctors hallucinate? Or was there still something deeper in that morgue?